Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 3 in social psychology for behavior change. Time's flying. It's already week 3. I'm excited about this. I'm not excited about this. What's underneath me, I hope you can see that it says slow connection. I have a very bad internet connection. I hope it will be better today or tomorrow when I upload these videos. But nevertheless, that means at the moment I don't have access to subtitles. I hope during this recording session that I will have access. If you need some kind of audio transcript of what I'm saying, if you need subtitles, please email me and I'll find a solution for that. I might be able to include that also on YouTube when I upload these videos. Okay, without further ado, let us start with week 3. And we will talk about wise interventions. How can we change behavior from a very social psychological point of view? And wise interventions are like one prime social psychological candidate to do that. And I want to kind of start by looking at some examples. And this is kind of like in the first chapter, we're looking and trying to see like what's the big philosophical, almost ideological approach to these interventions that we call wise interventions. Okay, what sets them apart from different interventions, and what are the techniques they're using? So in the first part, we're focusing almost exclusively on this kind of, let's call it philosophical or ideological perspective they have. And the idea here is, the key idea is that we do not change the person, we do not change the situation, but we do change the meaning people attach to themselves and the situation. Okay. Let's give 3 examples, because I think otherwise it gets so theoretical that it's really hard to follow, and it feels like I kind of understand what he's saying, but what is he actually talking about? What is he actually meaning? Okay, so here's the first example, and I think by now you're probably really familiar with that example already. And that example is of, let's say we identified a problem that in our universities, in our country, a certain subgroup of students is much more likely to drop out of university. And that has long-term consequences, bad negative consequences for these group of students, but also for the division in our society. So we want to change that. What can we do? First problem. Second problem. We have in one area of our country, we identified a certain deprived area, a relatively poor area in our country. We see that there are a lot of single mothers, and these with babies. And the shocking fact about this is that we discover that about 25% of these mothers physically abuse their children. You can imagine that if you do not have a lot of support, for instance, by a partner, if you do not have financial support, and you have a child that is somewhat difficult on top of that, then you might be tempted to lose your temper. And I think that is understandably, but obviously is wrong towards the baby, and also often has really bad long-term consequences physically and mentally for their child. So we want to stop that. We want to help the mothers to treat their children better. How can we do that? Second problem. Third problem. We're again in a certain area of our country, and we see that in our high schools, some groups of students do not do well. It seems like their achievement is lacking behind their potential. And one key aspect of that seems to be that these students often do not take very well in feedback. So when they're presenting their work and they have the talent, but now they need to learn from their feedback, they often disengage from the subject entirely. So instead of taking the feedback on board, they take it as a sign that they are insufficient, or that their teacher doesn't like them, and hence they kind of disengage from the class, and poor performances are the consequences. So this is the third problem. Okay, so these are 3 common problems I think a lot of countries in the Western world face, whether that's the UK, that's Germany, that's the US, or any other country probably in the world faces similar problems within their society. So how can we solve them? So let's focus for once, just to kind of illustrate that here, on the problem for the mothers who treat their children, let's call it harshly. So they have some harsh parenting and 1 in 4, and we want to reduce that. How could we do that? Well, one approach is to think about this as a problem of the person. We say the person is king and the person has to solve that. So maybe this is like a bad mother, and bad mothers might not know how bad it is to shake their child or to hit their child when is 1 year or younger. Hence, we might have to increase the knowledge, for instance, or we have to change the norms. They have to know that this is bad, or maybe they just lack the tools. We have some kind of intervention we need where we give them new tools that helps them to overcome their difficulties. So there's something deficient in the person, and we want to change that. Okay, one approach, a person-centered approach. And later on in I was tempted to say program, later on in our module, we would talk about person-centered approaches as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just one approach. There's another approach, which we talked a little bit in the beginning of our module, that says the situation is king. Maybe there's something wrong with the setup of the situation. One very obvious one is like, okay, maybe these mothers need more support. We have to give them financial support. Maybe there has to be somebody coming in, kind of taking off their like maybe child caring duties an hour or two. There's some things we need to change about the situation that helps the mothers to deal better with their at times difficult children. Okay, so there's like the person is king and the situation is king, and we have to change them. Both of them have different implications, right? The latter, changing the situation, is often, if you want to change them, is substantially more expensive, right? And it's often very difficult. The former is also often difficult, but yes, it's also something difficult, and also it's often difficult to communicate, because you go to the mother here and say, like, look, you don't say it directly like that, but between the lines you're saying, well, look, you're a bad mother. Here am I, who is going to teach you how to do better. Okay. Obviously, that can be done in a good way or in a bad way. All I'm saying is like, okay, there's a person-centric approach and there's a situation-centric approach. Vice intervention, a third way to deal with that. Okay, so here's just like, I think at the end of the last session, we had a little bit looked at that. If you think about behavior in a very general, kind of easy way, what leads us to behave in a certain way, right? Then we have kind of like here, 3 of the main drivers of the intention to behave in a certain way, and 3 of the main drivers to influence behavior: the value, the expectancy, and the norms, right? Expectancy value theories have that. You might have that also in health psychology if you're taking this module. Okay, so you could, for instance, and sometimes programs do that, economists like that, you can pay the mothers to change their behavior. Or you can change the situation in a way that you help mothers to feel they're more in control of it, for instance, by actually giving them support, right? Or you can kind of try to change the norms and see that they understand that what is expected of them is to not hit their child. Maybe that's the problem, okay? So we can try to change with different approaches each of these variables, but what we're trying to do is either changing these variables by changing the person or by changing the situation. Very different approach is wise interventions. Wise interventions try not to change the person or the situation, but the meaning that is attached to that, okay? The meaning that is attached to themselves, or people attached to themselves, and the situation as well. So let's look at the baby intervention again for a moment. What did they do in a study that is cited below here on that slide? So what they did is that they went to the mothers. They had actually 3 conditions. In one condition, they didn't do anything. They just had it as a control condition. And the second condition, they give them some knowledge, some information about how they should behave, what's good behavior, what's bad behavior, and kind of helped him to see that it's not good to hit your child when your child is only, for instance, 6 months old. And in the third condition, what they did is they had this knowledge intervention as well, but then they asked him, so the last time your child was crying, what do you think was happening? What do you think was going on? Okay, so they basically just did kind of like a Q&A. And so what they would say, like, okay, the mother often would say, you have like two answers to this. They would say, okay, I think my child is just a difficult child. I didn't want to say bad child, but it's like, oh, it's a crybaby, it's difficult, it's really suffering. I don't think I can do much about it. Okay. And then the interviewer would say, what else can we do? What else do you think could be happening? They were just like, well, maybe I'm a bad mother. Maybe I'm just not cut out of it. Maybe I'm too young for it. Maybe I don't have the patience. I was never a patient person. And I was like, well, what else can you do? What else could it be? And so they're not directly describing anything. There's often a technique that's used in coaching. If you're interested in that, it's often a technique that is used in therapy. But here they're basically trying to trigger something else. And at some point, the mother would say like, oh, well, maybe the baby was hungry, or maybe I should swaddle it differently, or maybe it was just tired, and if I push it around the block and help it to fall asleep, then this might be it. Or they think like, or something else, they need to be put on a tighter schedule so that it's more predictable, that helps them to sleep, and so forth. So the mothers eventually would come up with some strategies to handle the problem. Okay, and what we can see in the results, here you can't see because I will just tell you that, but what we see in the results is that in the control condition, about 25%, that's a fourth of the mothers would kind of occasionally use harsh parenting, like hitting and shaking, to regulate their child's behavior or their baby's behavior. In the information only condition, it was basically the same percentage. So just giving giving the mothers the information didn't change. But in the third one, where we try to trigger this change in meaning by asking what else could it be, guiding them away from I'm a bad mom or my child is a bad mom, but trying to look at from a situational point of view and trying to kind of unearth the tactics that are already within the mother, that reduced the child beating to 4%. Okay, so instead of 25 mothers in 100, 4 mothers in 100, a dramatic decrease in the effectiveness of this program, and absolutely or relatively cheap, right? And the key point here that I wanted to make, and I come back to this in the next two exams, the key point that I want to make here is that all there's done is kind of shifting away the attention or the interpretation of the mother as themselves being bad mothers or their children being bad children, or both of them. So that's the way they attached meaning to the situation and attached meaning to themselves, towards something more situational. What can I do? And it's not that they taught these strategies to these mothers. No, it was simply by having them unearth them themselves, discover themselves different strategies that help them to then in these critical situations see the situation differently and thereby react differently. Right? You can think about this in our second example. If you remember that, here we had an example where students have trouble interpreting or handling negative feedback. Okay, so what can we do? So here they did something what they gave wise feedback. So the problem is they want to give feedback. Feedback is, as I often like to say, negative feedback in particular is one of the key ingredients to improving, right? It's a key element to handle well, to success is handle well negative feedback. And here what the students, in the study that is cited here below, these were African-American studies, so it was done in US high schools, they took the criticism as a criticism of the person. They did not take it well, and hence disengaged and dropped out of these classes. So what the teachers were instructed to do is have high expectations, tell them you can do better, and also communicate in their feedback that they believe that they can do better. So there's a combination of reassurance, you can do it, I believe in you, but because I know you have all that potential, I also have high expectations for you. So high expectations plus high reassurance helped the students to see the feedback in a different way. What they did is they saw like, okay, this means that the teacher, more negative feedback means actually that the teacher wants me to do better, not wants to criticize me as a person, or wants to signal that I am not cut out for this. Rather the opposite. right? Because they believe I am cut out for this, hence they give me high expectation-based negative feedback. And that led to a dramatic increase in performance in these students. So again, it's not that the teacher was doing something wrong, or it was a bad teacher, or that the student was deficient in any way. No, it was the interpretation of the student of the feedback that they were getting as something wrong. And if we change this meaning they attach to the feedback, we can change the situation. Another example of a wise intervention. Okay, here's the third one. We talked about this a lot in previous, so I will just kind of rush to that, but this is like, okay, groups of students who do not feel like, or who drop out more substantially, telling them basically that everyone struggles, that struggle is a sign of belonging to the university, that basically just as bad lectures and many emails and office hours are part of the university experience, struggling, feeling like you're not made to do that is part of the university experience as well. And by learning that other students, independent of their background, feel the same, they reinterpret this struggle as something as part of it and not as a sign to drop out and that they do not belong. Again, there's nothing wrong with the student. Here, there's also nothing wrong with the university. Rather, it is this kind of change in meaning that helps the students to overcome it. So if you go back to the slide, right, then you can see instead of changing any of these variables per se within the kind of behavior production matrix, we're changing is the way these components are perceived, the way the situation, the way the oneself and the situation is perceived. And this change in meaning helps to helps people then to change their behavior. So we don't change the situation, we don't change the person, we change the meaning people attach to that. And next we will look a little bit closer at how one can do that. One of the key aspects here, and I just looked at the time, sorry I'm talking a little bit too long, I hope you're watching this on double speed, that's always more enjoyable. One of the key components is that we know meaning is a driver, a really important driver of behavior, and maybe as you will see in the other bits of our episode today, also something for the long term. The other key component is the uncertainty we are surrounded with, the uncertainty that is part of being part of being a person in a society, in a complex society, right? And so there is a lot of ambiguity due to this uncertainty. There are many ways where how we can interpret the situation. People here have kind of working hypothesis. So if I have not been going to the university and nobody in my family has been going to, and I said like, let me go in there and see if I belong, right? I have a working hypothesis and now I'm gathering some kind of data on it. And sometimes I might feel like I do belong and sometimes I don't. And we take in some ways advantage of these working hypotheses and try to change them. And hopefully then, if the situation affords the opportunities, we can change the working hypothesis into something of a trusted meaning, a trusted change in perception. Okay.